Thank you very much for coming. My name's Roger Dean, and I have a stand which allegedly is 1213. It's the far end of the conference room, and it has a bunch of my paintings. But today I'm going to take you quickly through the story, because ending up here with paintings was not obvious for me. All my life I drew and I painted, but when I went to art school, because I had maths and physics, the principal of the art school suggested I did industrial design. And that worked for me very well, because the schoolboy ambition was to design the future. However, I wasn't at art school very long when it was very apparent that designing the future was a future where everybody lived in boxes. And that made no sense. I did 4 years at Canterbury College of Art, pretty much getting fed up with the process of design in those constraints. And I went to the Royal College, being given a lot of freedom. I did my master's thesis on the psychology of the built environment. What kind of spaces make people feel stressed and uncomfortable, and what kind of spaces make them feel comfortable and happy. So I did that under the auspices of Professor David Pye, who was an architect, but at the time he was running the furniture school. So part of the deal was I could do my architecture, but I had to do the old piece of furniture. So we'll start with that. And by the way, if anyone has any questions at any time, just please shout out. This is a piece of furniture that was first exhibited, my first exhibition, in 1966. It was called the Sea Urchin Chair, because basically that was its shape. And the idea of it was that if you sat on it, it collapsed and gave proper support, but if you stood up and walked away, it would pop back up to that shape. So, picture of it in use. I don't know if these actually show, they might be a little bit burnt out. These are when I was starting the research, and my research really didn't get off the ground until the second year. And a friend asked all the questions, my research questions, to children, basically asking them what kind of spaces they liked, what they didn't like about the bedrooms they lived in, what they would like ideally. And the answers were intriguing, because children were very consistent in not liking, for example, hidden spaces under the bed, full-length curtains, clothes hanging on the back of the chairs, anything that could cause them anxiety. What they did like was much more interesting. Castles, palaces, tree houses, galleons, all kinds of stuff. But we had one child who described a space that they could physically tell there was nothing inside. So they were waving their arms around like that. And they wanted an entrance they could physically control, and they wanted to be at eye level with anyone in the room. So this was a children's bed I designed and built in 1968. That's my daughter. She's sitting there. Doesn't look anything like that.
Did you sell any of these?
Sorry?
Did you sell any of these?
There wasn't a mechanism to sell it, because it was part of the architecture. And I'll explain that as we go through. This is my final exam model, showing how the principles that the child's bedroom were based on. It's basically making defendable spaces and how it was applied throughout the house. So this is a model. I'll rush through these.
Is this plaster? What is the material?
It's plaster, and I carved it out of plaster. I definitely don't recommend that. Plaster is a chemical that leaches all the fats out of your fingers, and your skin cracks and it's bleeding, even though you've not cut yourself. Very uncomfortable. And obviously the sensible thing, if I'd only been sensible, would have been to wear gloves. But it was fun. It was fun watching the spaces come out of the plaster, and it worked in a way I hoped it would work. So we're starting to build bigger pieces. And this is a full-size prototype. So unlike the child's bed, an adult bed had to be more practical. It had to be possible to make the bed. So we managed to keep a lot of the qualities, but also make it accessible. And I'll find a picture which was key to it. Yeah, you can see here there are 3 steps up, and they rise clockwise. And it was fascinating because I knew that it worked if it rose clockwise. We made a mirror image, and it really didn't work. And I found out subsequently that castles in Europe and in Japan have staircases towards the accommodation rising clockwise. It's because they're defendable. Anyone attacking with a spear or sword is essentially off balance, while a defender is in balance. And if you know Japanese martial arts, it's supposed to give the defender a 2-dan rank advantage. So that was something I didn't know at the time, but found out afterwards. It was fascinating for me. So this is where I started. This is what I did at college, and we're now doing it. We've got 2 projects on. One of them is to build a resort village in England, which might seem a ridiculous idea, but that's where the first one is happening. And because the work I did was known, I was asked to join a team designing a moon base. The dangers for astronauts on the moon are immense. The radiation can kill, the cold can kill, the vacuum can kill. There's micrometeorites, there's moonquakes, and there is extreme heat as well. All that is known, but the reason I was asked to be involved is that astronauts will essentially be in a high-tech prison. They will be more isolated than any humans have been before, and for longer, and mental health was a big issue on the agenda. So I was asked to be involved. And one of the first paintings I did for the project, which was abandoned because it was a surface-based one, and it became very clear that an underground place to live would work much better. But the painting for that is actually on our stand. So, the next few paintings are designs for architecture, but some of them have been used on album covers. My first project on leaving the Royal College of Art was to design the interior for Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club. And he asked me to do some album covers, and as they say, the rest is history. I did a lot. This is a design for a spa, which was also used for Steve Howe's first solo album. This was a sports hall, which again got used by Uriah Heep for an acoustic album. Village Square, a project for Sydney, Australia. So this is how the projects in England might look. It's on a hill. This was interesting. I was asked by an emerging economy fund to design a hotel to fit into Prague, and it had to fit within the Gothic, the Baroque, and the Art Nouveau traditions of central Prague. So this was some of the sketches I did for that. And I've was asked to design a church for a congregation in California, Joshua Tree area.
And these are the drawings that were followed when the church was built, or not?
They weren't, and most of these were concept designs and not built. Some of them are still active. The moon base is very much active, but the church, unfortunately, the pastor moved on. He moved to a different area.
Do you think some of these could be 3D printed?
Yes, of course, yes. We wouldn't manufacture that way because, for the moment at least, the way we're planning to build them is much more accurate and effective, much quicker than 3D printing. But we are going to 3D print the models. And even though you can make computer graphics that you can explore, having a model teaches you more. Having something physical is really important to this process. And those will be 3D printed. One of the things that for me was fascinating, an anecdote I've told too many times probably. I was, my first week at art school, before I was rudely sent off to do industrial design, was spent in a room of about 30 students, and we were all drawing a naked lady, which for me at the time, I was just 4 days past my 17th birthday, was hugely embarrassing. I simply didn't know how to do it. And then getting called out in front of everybody to do industrial design was also very embarrassing. But the thing that was amazing for me is that as an industrial designer per se, we carried on doing life drawing. We did every kind of drawing you can imagine. We drew machines, we went out and drew trees, we just sat in the town and drew people walking along the town. We did perspective, measured perspective, shadow perspective. We did lettering. We did all of this, and it was very disciplined, very intense, and went on and on and on. But in my first year, the academic training for fine artists was ended. And I think that's been a disaster for art in England and America. The end of training. I mean, I had the experience, which has been a frequent one, of talking to students about drawing, and I talked to them about how I made a big breakthrough by having a cold. I don't recommend that as part of the education system, but I told my tutor I was going to take a day or two off because I was feeling unwell. And he picked up a lump of wood. He said, "Don't waste your time, draw that." Well, at that time, at art school, the same as at ordinary schools, lesson periods were 45 minutes or double, 90 minutes. And we started and finished a drawing in that amount of time, in 90 minutes or 45 minutes. And I was at home feeling a bit groggy. We had the UK equivalent of talk radio called the Home Service, and it was news, current affairs, plays, and odd bits of music. And I sat and drew this piece of wood for not 90 minutes, but hours. In the end, 12, 13, 14 hours, I don't know, but a very long time. I kept thinking maybe I should do something else or start again, but I kept at it. And for me, it was a revelation, because I learned that if you really persist and you keep on, you do things you had no idea you could do. And I learned 3 very important lessons from that. I learned that you have to put in the time. You have to put in the time while you're doing it, and you have to put in time long term. There's a cliche that I'm sure you all know, that it takes 10,000 hours to train a concert pianist. Well, for an artist, it's exactly the same. I mean, you can't imagine somebody who wants to learn how to play piano or guitar or any other musical instrument going to a college of music and being told to stand it in the corner and throw ping pong balls at it. Well, that's what art education is about. You're told to stand your aspirations in the corner and throw ping pong balls at it. or equivalent. Anyway, I was talking to the students one day, and I told that story, and the tutors were very angry with me, and they said, well, I suppose you think art is all about technique. And I said, no, I don't. But I think craftsmanship is critical. You can't have great art without great craftsmanship. And they said, well, what do you think of conceptual art? I said, it's what I do when I'm trying to design something. It's what every artist, every designer, every architect does when they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. And they knew that wasn't what they meant and challenged me on it. I said, the other kind, for me, doesn't exist. Art is ultimately about something somebody makes, and their skill at making is critical. The Japanese, again, I'll go back to that, have a saying when you're learning a martial art, that you train the hand, so the hand in turn trains the mind. A huge amount of your real estate in your brain is given over to hand-eye coordination. And the better you train it, the better your brain works. It's just that simple. You cannot have great ideas without the means to interpret them. Sorry, I'm pontificating. I'll go with the means.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
Excuse me.
Go on then. I know you're not clapping for me, you're clapping for the idea, but I think it's an important one.
Could I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Could I ask you a question? Okay, so the 10,000 hours that you refer to refers to when expertise becomes intuitive.
Yes.
It's accessible without conscious thought.
Yes.
Not so much the skill itself, but it is the ability to draw on intuition.
Yes.
So my question is, and I'm not an artist, so it's a question about in the artistic process, what is the balance of intuition and deliberative thinking, analytical, if you will, or derivative thinking? How do you blend that? Because what
I don't. I absolutely don't. It's sequential for me.
Okay.
The intuitive stuff, ideas come to you, and I make notes. And I think writers have this experience. You have to not impede the ideas by trying to rationalize and edit them. You let them come. The following day, in different circumstances, you beat them into shape, but you don't interfere with the process of letting the ideas flow. And I've talked to lots of writers, and they work that way. I've talked to lots of musicians. We've actually done lots of film interviews with musicians, and it's very much the same way. The process has to be free of that over-editing part of the brain. And I should tell you something very interesting. If you're being rational, you're trying to work out a quadratic equation, for example. When you're daydreaming, when you're having ideas, the brain is working 30% harder than if you were doing a quadratic equation, for example. And the reason we know that is the way we measure work is in temperature. The brain is hotter, it's working harder when you're daydreaming. And it's working much faster too. Niels Bohr, a physicist, I think he won the Nobel Prize turn of the last century, he had a theory, which you can go online and read. His idea was that he called it the gunslinger principle. And his idea was that two absolutely equally skilled gunslingers, the one that draws first would always lose because he's thinking. And the person who's reacting would be faster. And in Birmingham University in England, they did a test and pretty much proved that's the case. Reacting, which uses a different part of the brain, is quicker than thinking. So,
but only after 10,000 experiences.
Well, if it's equal, it doesn't matter. It could be 9, it could be 8. As long as both had the same. As long as it was equal, it's faster. But yes, you have to put in the training. Yes, absolutely. And I say training because training is different to education. There's a relationship, but one is absolutely physical and one is intellectual.
Thank you.
These were for a park in Malaysia, and this is a spa which would have an interior like the Steve Howe solo album which I showed earlier. This is another design for a hotel. And this one stands a fair chance of happening. It's currently being discussed with planners. When I go back to England, I'm seeing the local authorities and the potential investors. The client has the land and is very committed, so it might happen. This is a very small part of the hotel. It's only 30 rooms in that sketch. But the interior would be like the other stuff I showed you before. So, my first painting was when I left college and worked with Ronnie Scott's. But my early work typically was drawing, and often mechanical things. Early album cover for a band called Gentle Giant, and the album was called Octopus. Second Steve Hill album cover. I often did use architecture as part of part of my range of tools when I was painting them. But these are not technically paintings, these are drawings. They start as a drawing, and the drawing element of them is still inherent in it. So what's happening here is I'm colouring the shadows. It wasn't until 1982 or 3 when I started proper painting, if you like. And we'll get to those in a minute. Again, very much a drawing. We have a print of this on the stand. And this. Back in the early 70s, we used to sell enormous numbers of posters and cards and calendars with my early paintings on them. In the 70s, we sold something like 65 million, and I think the current figure is definitely over 100 million pieces. So they were widely known, these images, particularly back then.
Can I ask a question again about the process? As you're exploring your creative realm, at what point does logic or reality interfere with your thinking process?
I was trained as an industrial designer, so I keep it there. It's on a leash, but I keep it handy. But I don't let it interfere when I'm doing it, because if I'm doing a painting, mechanical constraints are less critical than if it's built for real, but I always have it in mind. There's a print of this downstairs too. This was the first Asia album cover. Asia was a combination of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, BS, and Roxy Music, John Wetton. If I go back to that one, sorry. I guess for me, this was probably the last piece I did that was essentially a drawing. And this was probably the first piece I did that was essentially a painting. And there's not much to tell between them because it's still very crisp. But from here on in, the painting loosened up considerably. So this is another Asia colour. And it still looks fairly crisp, but close up you can see it's quite a loose painting. The background to this was simply the band reformed, and they wanted the theme to be Phoenix, and the story behind the Phoenix is essentially there's only ever one Phoenix. And when one dies, it's reborn. So this is that end of the world scene where the Phoenix is reborn. Another one for Asia. The painting I did for them with the pyramids was their second album, confusingly called Alpha. And this album was called Omega, and in their tradition was not their last album. And this one is also a print we have. Their 30th anniversary. The dragon again, because that's how they started. And the reason they had a dragon on their first album is they were worried that, my gosh, the colour looks fairly brutalised. It doesn't look like that. On my screen I can't see that. I'm a bit worried about that. The colours look weird. Okay, I don't know what to say about this, but a lot of people who saw this and saw the movie asked me if I was influenced by the movie. Well, the painting existed long before the movie, and the production designer in an interview said he studied my work, he had the books while he was making the movie and referenced them, and he said, if you want floating islands, where do you go? So,
What movie?
what movie? Avatar. There is, I apologise because there's clearly an unhappy relationship between this computer and that projector, and the colours are coming out very strange indeed. I'm inclined to go, not to dwell too long on these because the colour is very disappointing. The painting, by the way, are typically 6 foot by 4 foot. I find that a very convenient size. And early in my career, I used to do them quite small, the drawings. But around my 40th year, my eyesight was no longer good enough to do that precise work. And I either had to get magnifying glasses and God knows what. I decided in the end to work larger and looser. And I was thrilled with the consequences. It was a very freeing experience. This was for Rick Wakeman's Journey to the Centre of the Earth. And this was a Pink Floyd symphonic album. And all the trees in this painting are from Point Lobos, near Carmel in California. I'm often asked about abstract art, and my response to it, as opposed to conceptual art, my response to abstract art is it is part of art, but it's not art, it's part of art. It's like the colour yellow. Yellow is a critical part of art, but it isn't art. And a lot of my paintings look like abstract expressionist works at the beginning. And you can see underneath the rock forms, before I painted the sky, before I painted the shapes, the highlights on the shapes, it was a squiggle of colour on canvas. And then afterwards I brought it into form. This was very abstract at the beginning too. And it does look kind of an abstract mess now. This one at least you can see in its proper colours if you go to the stand. This was a painting called The Old Bridge, and we have a print of that. The owl is different, and there are various other bits of it that are different. Essentially, it was inspired by this painting. Another owl. This painting, the original of this, is also on our stand. Again, another 6 foot by 4 foot painting. It really appealed to me, painting landscapes. I started off with basically machine type shapes in a lot of my early work and architecture. But it seemed to me that it would be a good idea to also paint the landscapes where the architecture should exist. And I thought it would be good to paint landscapes that are a little bit more inspirational, I suppose. There is a lot of this planet that's beautiful, and it's national parks. There's a lot more of it that we seem to have done a lot of harm to. And the Chinese had an old philosophy in feng shui, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. But the idea was that you could not just find a suitable place to build a house, but you could also reshape mountains and hills and rivers. And they did. On occasion, they did. Okay, I designed lots of logos. I did the original Virgin Records logo. I did some logos for bands like Yes, Asia, Richard Branson. He bought the original. So that was for the foundation. When Aisha was in the studio, the producer was from the record company, Geffen, and he looked at that and said, "It's illegible." And I said, "But it's only 4 letters. You've got to try harder." And I then said, "Of course, you have to recognize it, not read it. The idea of the logo is that you recognize it." And I showed you a dragon, which I also did for them. And the reason I did the dragon, I go back to that now, is that 3 of the members of the band, well, certainly 2 of them were formally in Yes, and all of them didn't want it to look like Yes. So I said, I can do a dragon. I've never done a dragon. I've certainly never done one for Yes. And they also wanted the logo to look different. When they delivered the album, John Wetton, who was the singer, said the boss of the record company, not David Geffen, but the day-to-day boss, walked him down the offices with his arm around the shoulder, and he said, "Your logo is illegible the cover is too dark, and we simply don't hear a hit record. The album, for the record, was the best-selling album of that year and sold 14 million. I'm not taking any credit for that, Mike. Just last year was the 50th anniversary of Yes, so I'm of an age with them, I guess. I liked designing logos and lettering. I was brought up where all lettering had to be Helvetica, which I found exceedingly boring. About as boring as architecture. When I talk to architectural students and graphic design students, I say, you know, this obsession with bland minimalism is a belief system. It's a faulty theology with delusions of rationality. I once designed a logo for a company, and they had about a dozen designers inside the company. And they took what I did, and they simplified it, they made it in Helvetica. And I said, why did you do that? And they said, it looks clean, modern, and legible. Give me a break. They had half a dozen focus groups who tested products. I said, show it to the focus groups, see what they say. And they asked the focus group, does this look clean, modern, and legible? And they got back a yes. And I said, that isn't how you do it. What you do is you show them the image and say, clean, modern, legible, boring, corporate, tedious stuff. Which most describes it? And then they had a very rude awakening. And the idea of it being modern is interesting to me because Helvetica was designed in the early 50s, so it's by no means modern. We had a lot of involvement with the music industry, which for me was great fun and a great opportunity because in the art world I was dealing with a system that had abandoned creativity and craftsmanship. And the joy for me of working with musicians is they're obsessed with craftsmanship and creativity. Excuse me showing all these, I'm not quite sure how to bypass them. Okay, besides designing logos for a variety of people, we also designed stages. And my daughter, who's sitting here, will be very embarrassed now. Together we designed a stage and costumes for the Puccini Festival in Terra del Lago in Italy. And she designed all the costumes and I designed the sets. That's her work. That's not an actual performance, that's a rehearsal. I love working in Italy, but some things defeated me. The auditorium for the opera was a 3,000-seater and it was outside, and the opera singers could fill that space without amplification, which was unbelievably awe-inspiring. But the consequence of that is they couldn't sing on consecutive nights. So what they had to do is they had to clear all the stage, set up for a different opera and different singers, And on the third night, put this one back again. And you'd think that would be made of wood. It was made of iron. And the guy who made it out of iron, covered it in polystyrene, covered the polystyrene in paper, and asked me to show him how to paint it to look like wood. I said, why didn't you make it out of wood? And he looked at me like I was an idiot, and he said, I'm a welder. That's us looking smart. And this is stages we did for bands. This was 1973 for Yes. A long time ago. We did quite a few for them. And this one actually was a puppet. It was huge. It was maybe 60 by 40 feet, and it moved out over the audience a bit. And that was for Yes. And this is the last stage, full stage I did for them. This is the drum kit, which had drums that were slaved to the bass pedal. That thing in the middle moves up and down. It makes a small space that when they were playing acoustically, it was like a little cabin, and then it flew around the rest of the time. Actually, I could show you that in action.
Yes.
This is the 1974 version of the stage I showed you before. I didn't realise this was tagged onto the slideshow.
Were these just in England?
Sorry?
Were these just in England, or were they around in the United States as well?
Yeah, they toured America. They're touring America this summer. I
With your sets?
they never stopped. They're in Japan at the moment. But I'm touring with them this summer. We're running an exhibition that goes with their tour for 6 weeks, from mid-June to the end of July. I could let you hear the music, but I don't think it would appeal. It's a very chaotic moment in it, but I've got this on the slideshow because all the sets are moving during this piece.
What's the material that you're using for movable sets that are traveling worldwide?
Okay, well, the most flexible ones were built on aluminium skeletons. So all the movement was in aluminium, welded aluminium. But the illuminated parts in this set were fiberglass. So all the things you can see there, the bits that light up, are actually fiberglass, transparent fiberglass. But on the next one I was going to show you, they're inflatable shapes. And that was because a part of the cost of this is trucking. The sets alone took up a couple of big trucks. And the inflatable ones fitted in a flight case that was so big. So, if I can find where the speaker is Ben in the room?
Yeah.
Where's the speaker on your mother's computer? I'm going to put the microphone next to the speaker, but this piece is going to be over before. But where's the speaker? I'm going to stop this. I'm going to stop this in case I'm charged a royalty. Okay. They start almost always, since I've known them anyway, with Stravinsky, the Firebird Suite. Okay, thank you. You've been very patient. Any questions? Go for it.
Your work is this interesting cross-section between architecture and industrial design and concept art. And I'm just curious, as a young man, who were your influences? Who did you look at and say, I want to incorporate some of what he's doing? Because as a young artist, you always absorb others before you function as your own artist.
Okay. As you can imagine, I've been asked that a lot. When I was 12 to age 14, which is a very impressionable age, my father was in the army and we were based in Hong Kong. And I got a comic, which probably no one's heard of here, which had a character in it called Dan Dare, Pilot of the Future. And I just thought it would be the coolest thing to design the future. It was a huge influence, but not artistically, really, just as an idea of what to do with my life. Before that and after, I loved doing drawings and paintings of animals. Freya went to study natural history and scientific illustration for a while. Yes, those were important influences, but in terms of other artists, in Hong Kong looks a bit like LA. It's not particularly amazing landscape, but what was amazing was Chinese watercolor paintings. There's a history of 5,000 years of these, of mountains and waterfalls and forests, and I thought they were fantastic. I thought they were really lovely. And just to give you an idea how impossible it would be to pin down any one person, in England, which is a tiny country compared to China, in the Victorian period, 70,000 watercolour artists were registered in the Royal Society of Watercolour Artists. So 5,000 years of Chinese watercolour artists, there were huge numbers. But that would be what I would say would be the key influence outside the comic world. And subsequently, there have been a lot of artists that I thought, if only I'd known about you, or perhaps if they're historical, if they're not alive, I would have been influenced by. But because my art school training was very much focused on design, I didn't see as much art as I should have. I saw a lot, but after I left college, I saw a lot more. But by the time I was seeing them, all I did is love the work and not necessarily, I was too set in my ways for it to be a direct influence.
How about music? Because you've shared many years around, yes, Asia, Steve Hackett, all
Yeah.
these great musicians. Has that done anything to influence you on the way you've been thinking after you met them or after you've shared so many years with them?
I was asked about, had there been any influence from musicians. You mentioned Steve Hackett. Steve Hackett played guitar with a band called Genesis that were hugely successful. Steve's a very old friend of mine. We had dinner a couple of days ago on a cruise ship where he was playing. And we've often talked in public about the process of where do ideas come from and how do you capture those ideas and bring them into the world. One of the questions I was asked was, do I ever paint music? And I said I don't. And I was, except in the case of synesthesia, I didn't really think it was a credible thing for an artist to do. And Steve said that he did think of music in terms, not of art, but in terms of colour. He said certain key were always a particular colour for him. So it was an interesting conversation. I said I felt that art was entirely in the world of space. It was two-dimensional or three-dimensional, but it was defined and lived in space. Music, to me, seemed to be entirely a child of time. It lived and existed in time rather than space. So, I know that if you were a philosopher, and particularly if you're a physicist and a philosopher, you might say one and the same thing, and of course they interact, but to the layman, they are quite different worlds. How are we doing? Anyone else got a question? Okay.
Actually, I'm interested in the preparation for when you draw or paint animals. Do you take photographs beforehand, have live models? Just curious about how you develop some of your paintings with animals incorporated.
Okay. Animals, animals can be very unhelpful models. There was a painting during the slideshow of an owl sitting down, and that was both a photograph and a drawing. I was able to sketch that. I did a lot of sketches. There was another painting of an owl where it was in mid-flight landing, and there was no way I would have been able to sketch that without the help of a photograph. But I was in the presence of that owl. It was a European eagle owl, and it was in I have to say, an owl prison. I hate to think of it that way. It was a big space, about the size of this corner of the conference room, but it's illegal to let them free in England, which sounds to me absurd because they're such beautiful creatures, but it was imprisoned in this. I did go to Carla Lane's Animal Sanctuary, and I did draw and photograph owls there. So, yes, I would like to be in their presence. If they're behaving, I'd like to draw them. If they're more active, definitely photograph. Yeah, I can't invent an animal. And when I am, for example, a dragon, I have a certain person in this room will come along and say, Dad, you've got the elbow wrong. Repaint it for me. So, I need reference, photographic of the real thing.
I was just going to ask, what are you working on now in terms of paintings? You mentioned you were working on some building projects, but paintings.
Yeah. The question was, what am I working on now? I have a painting on an easel in my studio that I started before Freya was born. I have probably 2 or 3 that are in various stages of development. I do about 4 paintings a year, so not very many. And I have a hell of a lot I want to get on with. And all the time, I have other ideas coming along. And again, I go back to Steve Hackett. He told a story that he was ill, had very powerful stomach cramps, and he was in New York, supposed to be doing book signings or album signings, and he had a dream, and he dreamt of a piece of music that was operatic or symphonic, and during the dream of the music, the pain went away, and he wants to record that. And as we were talking, he talked to me about being involved and the pictures he liked and he thought will go with it. So things like that happen, and I got very excited about the idea of that. We talked about singers who could do, he wanted a soprano, we talked about different names, and he wondered if he could persuade them, and I thought, just ask. But I was very glad that he asked me to work with him on that. So I'm often asked to do things. I have a lot of things I want to do. I carry a sketchbook with me absolutely all the time. My sketchbook from 30 years ago, about half filled with Freya's drawings, but I do carry them all the time. I have lots of ideas I want to do, and I have to say it's probably a bit wicked, but my ambition is not to sell all my paintings. If somebody came up to me and said, I'd like to buy them all, I don't know what I'd do. I'd probably say no, because I want to build somewhere to put them. But obviously, we're here, and we will be selling some. If I spent most of the rest of my life building, I would be pretty happy, but I wouldn't not paint. I'd never not paint. Okay, sorry.
Can we go back to the concept of space and the fact that everything I've seen has such curvature and dimension to it? How does a space with corners affect you, such as this room, or how the world lives and you're in your own form always?
Well, we didn't always build things which were full of square corners. Sometimes we built things which were very pointy, and I'm completely enthralled by, for example, Gothic cathedrals, other temple designs. We have historically built buildings that are stunning and absolutely amazing. And it's only in modern times, about 100 years, that these incredibly boring, plain, oppressive buildings have been the norm. And the sooner they cease to be the norm, as far as I'm concerned, the better. I love the curves, but it isn't the only way. The only thing I can say is, if ever you get a chance, and I hope you do, to be in one of those spaces, they do feel incredibly tranquil. I know that sounds like propaganda, but it's true.
How does that affect your creativity?
How what?
As you age?
As I age? I'm not aging, what are you talking about? Get real. I don't know. Obviously it's a question I've been asked, and one of the things that I've been aware of, and a magazine asked if they could reproduce 6 of my paintings, Well, the 6 they chose were from 1972, 73, and I thought, I was very pleased to be asked, but I don't want to be represented only by what I did in 1972. I think as a craftsman, I get better, I learn more. On the level of creativity, it's hard to say. I still have so much stuff in sketchbooks I want to do, and they get more and more every year. There's more and more ideas I don't have time to do. I might be deluding myself, but I think ideas flow, and so far, touch wood, they've not stopped. I mean, other people might wonder if they have, but I don't think so. And certainly I get better at taking an idea and making it. Is that okay? Thank you. And thanks for not challenging. I don't know what time I'm supposed to finish, but if there are any more questions, okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, that was very satisfying. For quite a while this afternoon, there was just 2 people here. And I thought, well, this is going to be a cozy chat. Thank you all very much indeed for coming.
Thank you.
Excuse me.